继续 Braid 时空幻境的周年重制版。上一期应该已经把 Design 的 Monologue 部分算打完了，进到第二个部分 Special Topics。这个应该也算打了一段了，1/3应该是有，剩下就不知道有多长了。这边算是看完了，怎么先看底下呢？先往下走了，他妈都一样了。这边的几关算连在一起的，怎么上去呢？好，为什么有关在那儿？Pattern breaks 啊，这个是 level names。我操，这边还有这么多，这干嘛呢？好，puzzle tolerances， 我操，压废了。level names， 呀，这种关你正常根本上不去的。呀，这个是能上去，这个上不去，这个没有办法的。啊，可能是要你一路上去，一路上是从底下来看。Introducing the idea of pattern breaks， 什么叫 pattern breaks？ 好，在哪儿？I mean, where is it？ 这个应该是别的一个篇章了吧？什么 conversation with 什么什么什么什么？ちょっと待って、お前長すぎじゃない？これ何？ The story screens。啊，就是这个 Cassie Muratori 的。乍一看是一个这个 Japanese name， 其实是一个 Italian name。因为你念姆拉托利念成春鸟是可以的，但这其实是一个意大利语的姓氏，而春鸟这个姓在日语中其实很不常见，纯粹只是理论上的可能。An idea of break patterns 啊，这里是连在一起的。Introducing the idea of pattern breaks， 这里算 pattern breaks 吗？那这肯定先不打呀。哎，等等，怎么有这么多事 ？The Cloud Bridge， 好。哦，这个就到这儿了啊，它一路上去，怪不得。那这果然这个地方 ，pattern breaks。能把这 commentary 都做的这么复杂，也是有点厉害。怎么了？
Is there more to say about why there is a puzzle actually in the world? Like why did you want to do that? And
that was just the idea that I had, right? Like that was the so there's the question, how do you get collectibles and make them meaningful? People probably don't think about it as a collectible, but you know, in Braid, a different way that this happens is as you solve each world, I guess it's once you complete the actual puzzle piece, then that stairway sort of shows up and you can get up to the attic, and it's sort of like you're collecting the stairway pieces, right? But that's a way of making it matter because you can go climb on those stairs. That stairway in Braid, a different way that this happens is as you solve each world, I guess it's once you complete the actual puzzle piece, then that stairway sort of shows up and you can get up to the attic, and it's sort of like you're collecting the stairway pieces, right? But that's a way of making it matter because you can go climb on those stairs even when they're incomplete, right? And you're like, oh, I can get up 2 of them, but then this one's gone, but I see if that were in place I could go up 2 more, and like it just, even though logically speaking it's you need 5 out of 5, right. It's just better in some way. And so with the puzzle pieces, it's like, okay, why collect puzzle pieces? 1, it like matters. 2, it could tie into the story because you have an image, right, that you're gradually revealing, and it gave pacing that you can play with. So that's why there are puzzle frames in the middle of levels often. It's to give you a break and some variety in what you're doing in the middle of the level before you go back and do like more hard puzzles. It's like, oh, I can, if I got 5 of the pieces, I could try putting them together, or I could, if they don't fit quite, I could at least look at them and try and figure out what corner this corner is, even if it doesn't attach to something, or I can try to figure out what the scene's going to be. You have a gradual reveal of the scene that's going to be in the image. All those things are positive, and I didn't have a different idea that was better, that had as many positives.
So then did you place those panels where you have to put the puzzles in locations where you thought people needed breaks, or?
I think so. Also, though, like it was a general heuristic that I'm trying to give people a nice break in the middle, but it's also just a little bit intuition and a little bit trying to work with the designs of levels that I have. And like sometimes I felt a little bit stuck, like the ideal for this place for this puzzle frame would be here, but I kind of can't do that without destroying the level because it's too tight, so I have to put it on the next level, and it's not quite where I would like it to be or whatever. There's also, this is kind of an unspoken rule in the game, but I believe you'll find it intact. They're never at the beginning of a level because you like have to get to them. It's like
a reward.
You have to earn it a little bit somehow. So they're usually toward the end. It actually would have been fun to put one at the beginning of a level, but I just never did that.
The pattern breaking thing.
Yeah.
Oh, pattern breaking 性这意思。
So now, when it comes to something like the World 2 puzzle, I'm playing a little bit of a game with myself there.
Okay.
Because that isn't about time stuff.
Right.
To me, it came a little bit later in development after this other pattern was established. And so to me, it's a pattern break sequentially in time.
Okay.
Even though to the player it totally isn't.
I see.
And I know that, but there's something, when you work on something for years, you can get really complicated about it. And at some point, I like the weird existential fact that this is a game about us having different experiences sequentially. The chronological sequence to the player is different from the chronological sequence to the designer. And this thing being there early for the player is some vestige of that phenomenon. And
Right.
absolutely nobody is ever going to get that.
Well, if I may,
But I know it.
yeah,
right?
like, is it a little bit like when someone's telling you a story and they say, but I'm getting ahead of myself? Is it kind of like that, where it's like, oh, I know all of the stuff because I already know the whole thing I'm telling
I
you.
made this game. I know what
Right,
all
yeah,
the things
yeah.
are.
And so I started to say something that would only really make sense if you also had known the whole thing. And then I'm like, oh, wait, okay, sorry, yeah. So it's this
Yes,
little,
although
it's
usually-
this little thing coming out that's like, well, I already know all this stuff, so trust me, this is interesting. You'll get it in a little bit.
I mean,
or
I think the
whatever.
Princess Bride movie does that, if
Yeah,
I'm remembering
yes,
correctly.
yes.
Yeah, usually that's done, though, in an audience-friendly way.
Right.
I am doing it in an audience-unfriendly
Unfriendly way.
So everything that I just said about that is all what I think about it.
Right.
But it also might just be my mind's way of justifying this thing that's cool that I wanted to do.
Right,
And
right,
coming
right.
up with a reason why it's okay.
Right,
Mhm.
right.
There is another reason that I think is a little bit similar and may also be slightly a rationalization, which is World 2 is the world where you kind of can't do a lot. It's just rewind.
那第一
The
章
other worlds have all these elements of magic that emerge
就
from
本来
the
就
rule
tutorial
set.
Right.
And in World 2, there's like no room. There's the initial magic of like, oh, cool, I can rewind.
Right,
but
right.
that's
But-
it.
On the face of it, there's not room for
Yeah.
phenomenon magic in the same way.
Right.
And so making a hole in it, like poking a hole in that universe through which the magic happens, somehow felt okay. And in fact, if that's going to happen, so that could have been in any world.
Right.
Why is it in World 2?
Right.
Which seems to even be the weirdest place to put it because it's so early in the game.
Right.
And the answer is because World 2 is where it makes the most sense in some way.
Right.
Because World 2 is so spare mechanically, so it has the most conceptual space for it, But also in the other worlds, because they're more complicated, it would be more confusing or
And less special,
something.
yeah.
And less special, yeah. See, this is the thing that I always try to say, to tell people, is like, it's good to have reasons about why you do things.
嗯
But like I said, most of your brain is not the reason part.
Right.
And a lot of it has pretty cool ideas. And if you reject them because they don't totally conform to reason,
嗯
you're maybe not hitting your potential in terms of ideas. Like, what ideas can you bring to bear? However, if you don't apply reason, you're one of these random wacky artists who just is doing wacky things all the
这说得
time.
好有
and
道
that's
理
what makes you creative, is that you're random.
嗯
Right, right, yes.
And that is the kind of person with whom I have fundamental personality conflict. I don't like that,
Okay,
but I do have a little bit of it, right?
Right,
A little
right.
bit of it.
right.
As the last little, like, cherry on the cake that's already very good.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. So a random cherry on a good cake,
Oh, logical
on a
cake.
logical cake,
It's good.
is good. But a logical cherry on a random cake would probably not be.
Yes.
Yes,
Although,
definitely
you know,
not be, yeah.
logical is maybe not quite the word that I would use.
Coherent or
but like, coherent and
something,
well
yeah.
structured
嗯
and high quality
I
ingredients.
think I
and
get
all
what
these
you mean.
things.
I don't know if we've
Yeah.
explained it well, but
No, I think that's
That should be
and I don't
fine.
think that I've ever explained this particular thing. Like, I've talked to a few people about it, maybe even on
Okay.
the record, but I think what I just said, for anyone listening, is the best explanation that I've ever given of this thing
of that thing. Okay.
of that thing
to anyone else.
to anyone else。靠，这个我还是挺能理解的。能设计出这样的游戏的开发者，一定是逻辑很强的这种类型。他刚刚说的我完全理解。有时候你是需要一些这个灵感的，就你可以讲是玄学、超自然的东西。比如说，这个你要下棋这是很完全的逻辑，有些时候打牌不一定看逻辑，是吧？是要看感觉的。比如说你觉得对面就没有，但这个有什么原因呢？没有原因，就纯粹是靠感觉。是要有一些超乎寻常、不走逻辑、不走理性的东西，是需要这么一点最后一点点缀的。但是如果说对面有一个人，他基本上不用逻辑，全靠这种玩呢，什么呢 ？personality conflict，我完全同意这个看法。我跟这个在刚刚这个问题上，我跟开发者应该站在同一条线上。我也喜欢这种感觉，就基本上这个蛋糕本身是以逻辑思考构成的，就90%我做的决定、说的话都应该有理由支撑。你完全可以问我你为什么这么做，我可以给出理由。但剩下10%你需要一点这个灵感创新、不走寻常路的地方。如果说完全没有呢，完全遵从逻辑呢，就跟机器人一样，就会觉得很 boring。当你有灵感的时候，你没法用，这是坏事儿。但如果你完全这个不靠逻辑呢，就 wacky 是吧 ？wacky artist doing wacky things。
Where does this idea come from? Because yes, like if you go listen to that lecture that you gave,
这个还
it's
挺有
very
意思。
clear that you think that, for example, some of the stuff you do in Braid has these sequence breaks, some of the things you did in The Witness have these sequence break ideas.
Sequence break.
And you talk about If on a Winter's Night a Traveler potentially having these sequence breaks. Like you're not sure, but you're like your interpretation of the book is like if you look at it this
Italo-Calvino.
way, there's these possible things where it's like, oh, he sets up something that happens recurringly, and then all of a sudden in one chapter it doesn't happen. You know, intentional, unintentional. Like, what am I reading into? You know, what's going on? And it creates this like interest there. And what I was wondering is that something you're realizing after the fact, or did you realize that in the books at the time and you carried that forward and that's where it comes from in Braid, or is it something totally else? Like, how does this idea arise? Because it's not something that is often talked about elsewhere.
I don't think I ever got it from anyone else. I don't know if anyone else in the games industry has said this kind of thing.
Okay.
But my perception of it is that this is just an
He
idea that I developed on my own.
Okay.
Now, is it influenced by stuff like Calvino and all this stuff? I mean, probably. Like,
啊，这是个作者
at the very least,
Italo Calvino。
this idea of this abstract multi-dimensional pattern that we're putting together is certainly influenced by those books, because they do that all over the place.
Yeah.
And you could say that that's what I try to do when I do an end game or
I see.
something like that, right? An end game is probably a special case of a pattern break that a lot more people are familiar with. right?
This is probably bigger and more important pattern break in a way.
Yes, but I like to play around with it all over the place. You know, another way to think about it that you'll understand, because we've talked about this before,
Okay.
just in terms of like economics and capitalism.
这有关系吗？
There's just this phenomenon, right? Where, like, let's say you start a company and you're famous for making high quality things or whatever, right? You establish this pattern that people associate you with high quality things. And the thing that inevitably happens is somebody comes along and says, we've stored up a great deal of potential energy that we are not exploiting because we're spending all this money on quality, right? If we stop spending money on quality, it'll take people a while to figure it out. And in that time, we'll make a bunch of money. And then eventually we'll have depleted our brand value and we'll crater. But that like happens with literally everything, intentional or not.
Okay.
That's the pattern.
Okay.
There's establishing this pattern of being something valuable that people want. And then now that there's a bunch of potential energy in there, converting that potential energy to kinetic energy, right?
Okay.
So this is like that. And in fact, it's actually, it is a little bit similar in that even once you've established a pattern, if you break it a whole bunch after that, you obliterate it.
Right. So in the same way you said, if you completely trash the brand value, then it's... But in this case, you're not trying to trash any value. You're trying to make it be good.
Yes,
so...
I'm adding to it.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to tell you, like that idea that I have about this thing that happens with brands, I don't know where I picked that up. And I mean, it's obviously something that's true, but like I think about it in this way of like storing potential energy. Like you're building a strong structure that can then withstand you poking some holes in it.
So if I then create yet another analogy for this tortured set of analogies we're using. So in some sense, what I hear you saying now is it's almost like building up, you know, it's the ski jumper. If I build up enough speed, I can go off this jump and do a cool trick. I can't keep doing that because I will just crater into the ground. But if I set myself up properly, I can sort of have enough, like, it's almost like design momentum. I can have enough design momentum to carry me through a wilder space that I would not have been able to sustain continuously, but because I'm only going to do it for this trick, and I've done a good job setting myself up, I can accomplish this thing that's more than what I could have done if that had to be the whole game or something. You have a pattern momentum that allows you to do something you couldn't otherwise have done on its own.
I mean, I think that analogy makes more sense with regard to Braid and whatever. If you imagine that, like, the ski jump was 95% of it was the downhill part.
这个例子都很难懂。
And everybody paid attention to the downhill part as being, and you did stuff on it.
Slalom, it's slalom for some reason,
And then you do the jump.
Right. Yeah.
Right. But in reality, like, the jump is kind of the point. Right? And that makes it a little different. I mean,
analogy.
I could imagine a game like that, but I haven't done that game.
Right.
You know? Yeah.
这个不太可能，95%的准备，最后跳起来呢才是最关键的。但你这从游戏角度来说，你说前面95%全部是 tutorial， 只有5%才是正餐，这种可能性是极低的，基本上不太会有这种设计。啊，这个讨论东西确实还是有趣，纯粹就是访谈了。啊，这个已经到这儿了是吧？这里应该是有2个，那边还有1个，啊，也算看掉了。来，这个的话是这里看。
Most of the levels, you go into them, and there's a.
现在还在讲那个什么 pattern break，pattern break 就简单的说，你按节奏来，大大大大大大大大大大大，突然停下来，这个就是 pattern break， 就先让你感觉这一关就应该是这样的，然后突然来个跟之前完全不符合的东西。
For the level, and it comes up on the screen, and it kind of tells you what the level's about, but not really in a spoilery way. Hopefully. For this level, I was like, what name do I put there? That kind of doesn't spoil this thing.
啊，不算剧透是吗？
Like, if you called it handoff or something, that gets maybe people don't know exactly what that means, but you're going to kind of spoil the idea.
Or sacrifice, similarly.
Sacrifice would be the sacrifice of Isaac. Yeah.
You kind of know that, like, okay, one of my guys probably gets killed in the spikes here.
And you ruined the feeling and the surprise and like the
gut
gut
clench
that happens.
Right.
And so I was like, oh, well, this is also a place where I can break the pattern.
Oh.
So I break the pattern here, and well, there's
还
two
是
things
讨
that
论
happen,
pattern
right? The
break
level fades in. There's an icon representing the level, and then there's a name. And for this level, there's an icon, which just illustrates somebody standing next to a pit with a key, and no name. And that felt to me like a good place to put it, because the fact that there is no name before you even go into the level is communication, because we broke the sequence. You notice that, hopefully, unless you're just sleepwalking through the game, and you're like, that's weird. What? And you're like, okay, I'm going to tread carefully for a little bit. Like the human mind just has this in it, right? Like, I'm going to tread carefully for a little bit because I don't know
what's going on here.
I don't know exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
Something changed, right? And so that's what that is. It's a little signal that this is an area of a little bit more tension or a little bit more drama or something, right? But also you get to decide that. Like, I don't play music to make you feel a certain way. I mean, apart from the music that's already in the game, I don't go dun 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 as the thing fades in
or like
or whatever.
tense violins.
No. In fact, it's a small change.
Right.
And it's not linguistic. In fact, we take away the language.
Yeah.
It's more like body language or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? It's the body language of the game is like suddenly the game feels a little bit strange about something and isn't saying hi to you in the morning when it normally would.
Okay.
And it's like, wait,
it's passive aggressive.
Did I not do the dishes last night? Like, what? Why is this?
Right.
And that's one of the examples that stands out the most in my mind in the game. It's one of my favorite examples. It's subtle enough that, again, I'm not sure a lot of people think much about it consciously, because that fade in only lasts a couple of seconds. And then probably what most people remember is the actual level that comes after. But the thing to realize is how that level is received. The part that people remember, their experience there depends on the initial conditions.
Right.
Right. Even if they forget the initial conditions.
Right. Yeah.
And so initial conditions are important.
Initial conditions are important. Cascade. 之前的关于什么来着？名字上来说。没有名字的说。对，确实有这么一关没有名字的。Cascade 的话是これはかなりむずいね。这关は結構むずい気がする。看一下有没有什么别的状况。没有。
And then Cascade, all right. This is like a Rube Goldberg thing. There's all sorts of things going on in this level. The left half is coupled to the right half in complicated ways.
Right.
So it's much more than one screen's worth of logic that we have to think about. So we've seen this idea of dividing the frequency by two, stepping down the frequency. We did it in some earlier things by creating collisions, and now we can do that with the ring, so we can slow down that cannon. But there's also several nice places in this level where we can use the ring just to make our lives a little easier, right? To make the air control on some of the jumps a little easier. And then there's also some sequencing we have to think about here. So I had to jump on a monster to get onto the cannon that is floating above the flaming spikes. So I ended up placing the ring on that cannon and just leaving it there. And that meant that I had to think about the order in which I did things. And I just walked off without the ring. And luckily, I had a brand shiny new ring as soon as I entered the next level.
Yes. Well, that is actually, that is intended that you leave it up there. And yeah, you left it up there, you know,
okay.
But it's a video game, right? So.
Well, yeah, que sera, sera.
Que sera, sera.
Like, I would like for there to be a way to get you to get that back, but you would have to add a bunch of contrived stuff to the level about maybe somehow
And
when
the
you
level
get in
already
there.
has so much stuff.
Yeah, maybe somehow when you get in there, you can throw a switch that like opens a trap door above the thing, so you could fall down and get it. But then you'd be thinking about that when you're trying to solve the puzzle, right?
Right.
So then maybe it could be a secret trapdoor that just looks like the rest of the background, but then you'd be through the rest of the game going like, I wonder if there's more secret backgrounds.
Well, and if it was that easy to get down onto the cannon, then we didn't need to do all the
It
other
nega-
stuff to get
yes.
to the cannon.
It negates
to
your
put
heroic
the-
effort.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's some things that I also like about, well, and so the fact that you need to leave the ring on the level and leave the level is a little bit video gamey, but like we're a little bit postmodern here. I just really like the visual of the fireballs going into the slowdown zone and coming back out, and
Yeah,
you
that's
seeing
nice.
the space dilation. Now that said, okay, so one of the things I wanted to do with this level was make a level where the different puzzles sort of bleed into each other or influence each other, right?
Right.
And are not separate. That's another instance of this thing that I do where I establish patterns where throughout most of the game the puzzles are separate, right? If 2 puzzles are on the same level,
They're usually on 2 separate screens.
Right.
They're usually each about 1 screen big.
they're separated enough that you have a pretty good idea that they don't interact, and they're there more because they're related thematically.
Right.
And here all of a sudden that's different, and that increases the difficulty. And I think it decreases clarity, but I still wanted to do it in the game. And
Well, so for me, that was pleasurable. I mean, I think some puzzles should be like that. You know, it's true that there's a lot of levels where it feels like a series of small puzzles, or little, like I said, little paradoxes or little koans. And this is much more like paragraph sized or, 5-paragraph essay sized. But I think it also helps here that once you have the logical idea, none of this execution is that hard. There's it's a little bit tricky
A little bit tricky.
to, like, even after you step down the frequency of the fireball cannon, the monster still has to go through several monsters. I think that there's a periodicity of roughly 4 or 5 before one of them
Yeah.
gets through the gap in the fireballs down
Dude.
to the next level. It took me a couple tries to catch up with him and jump on top of him, or I guess I could have hung out there and let him move under me.
the
but instead I
execution's a little
had
bit
to,
hard there. I think.
It's a little bit hard,
But not that hard.
so hard. I mean, again, because I'm not a super platformer. I mean, like I'm not somebody who could play like Celeste, right?
Okay.
I understand the beauty and the joy
哎，这个
of
是
those
第几关来着？
games,
这个
and
就是
I'm
第一关。
impressed by the people who can play those games.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
for me, maybe I'm getting old.
Fucking hell.
But that would be tough for me.
想不到吧？居然能在这个作品里面看到 Slash，挺像，那个才是纯 platform， 那个就是解谜项是相对较少的，虽然也有这样的关，当你 strat 定好了之后难度会下降，但这个难度下降是不开玩笑的，是 platformer 玩家行列中难度下降。如果你真的认为是手残的话，你看5个不同的打法，你会发现你没有一个打法能选的。这个就是纯看操作的游戏，不算是 puzzle game。
And then in the face.
这卡了。
Actually, backwards.
Usually on what about of him, Reynolds.
Holy shit！ 这种啥？啊，就是那个什么
So then World 1.
，It's pretty easy.
Easy. It's kind of like given to you almost. Were you okay with that?
No.
Yeah, I mean, it's the end game.
So it's a reward almost?
It's a time to break the pattern established by the rest of the game. If you don't do that, isn't an end game really? If it's just more levels, but there's fiction that somehow makes it try to seem more important, that to me is not a good end game.
But is it just that that situation of bidirectional time was not conducive to harder puzzles and therefore that's what it was? Or you're just...
There's a little bit of that. Like, I have to work with what I find, right? And so I was like, what can I do with this? Okay, I could make monsters go backwards. I could make other things go backwards, but the little plant guy, it's kind of basically the same backwards as forward. He goes up and down. There's the bunny rabbits, which, again, like I said, the movement is complicated. So, like, you could put in some if statements about to make them go backwards. But, like, I just didn't want to go there. It just didn't seem that good, again. It's like, okay, so we made these guys go backwards. Like other things, okay, cloud cannon. It goes backwards. It's the same as going forwards. It's just the clouds congeal on a wall and go backwards. So there isn't one. Other things, you kind of can't do. For example, you throw the lever, a platform goes or a door goes, right? You can't start a lever moving and then force the player to throw a switch at a certain time, right? That doesn't make any sense. Now, in the actual finale level, we sort of do have that, but it's like it's the princess throwing the levers, and they're kind of causal in both directions, and you probably don't exactly understand what's going on in that case. But when it's scripted like that, you could kind of make it happen. When it's the player doing things, you can't. And so I actually found myself quite limited getting to this point in terms of like what could I actually do? Maybe there's something cool that I didn't think of. It's quite possible, but I was like, okay, this is enough. Like, I think if you jump straight into the finale level, that's a little too hard of an entry. So like here, we've got a little bit of an intro, get used to things going backwards. Isn't that interesting? Is a world in its own right. And then there we go.
And then there we go. The Cloud Bridge 啊，这回到这儿了是吧？
So now, when it comes to something like the World 2, even
A random cherry on.
啊，这个例子还是很有意思的。
Where did some of the stuff you do sequence breaks? Like
when I say the thing that in my establishing that you're building
prop
stuff on it.
Slurse
I mean,
analogy.
I could imagine a game like that, but I haven't done that game.
Right.
You know, yeah.
The Cloud Bridge 啊，然后这个是
Is there more to say about why there is a puzzle?
You need it at the beginning of a level because,
For the
but I just
pat-
never did that.
The pattern breaking thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
The Pattern Breaking Thing。这个 Moshka 是已经是最顶上一个了。所以这里其实也是一个 Pattern Break，一个一个能上来，然后最后那个顶上的你居然够不到。Holy motherfuck! A break in level names, a break in puzzle design, a break in the way the game is structured. Oh, a break. A break in the way the game is structured. A break in the puzzle frames. 啊 frames， 他说的是这个 frame。More discussion of puzzle frames and pattern breaks。这个应该能有个地方能到下一关了。哎，最顶上的怎么过去啊 ？Pattern break，motherfuck。哎，这个真的没办法。下一个门在哪儿？这好像到头了，那上不去了。靠，这个确实是 pattern break。왜你아가라나이가래？这个무리잖아 pattern break。Level names， 这吃不到啊！他就故意设计出来让你碰不到的吗？也それは你ない的。但你现在这么搞的话，确实不可能碰到。永遠に無理だから。也不可能有小怪让你上去。这个看来只能走一步看一步了。嗯？我操！哎，藏得好深啊！操！眼尖不眼尖，根本看不到。操 ！A breaking the a breaking the kinds of puzzles that are in the game. Epilogue 啊，这个哦，我操，这都行。看一下，我估计后面可能还有新东西。这里不看了，これまどうでもいいや。想看的暂停看。俺はもう前に進むしかない。Water Stuffed Monkeys。这个地方的设计嘛，它可以明白了，而且没了。不懂。哦，对，我操！
A different example of a pattern break that's a lot more subtle in this game is
The epilogue.
well, the epilogue that you get to at the end, right? Even the final level before the epilogue is pretty different from what else happens in the game.
Right.
That acts as a break and also just like a dramatic, it makes it feel like a heightened moment that it's so different from the rest of the game.
Yes.
But then in the epilogue, I straight up break rules that were constant through the rest of the game. For example, like obstacles look a certain way. They have high frequency details and are well defined and all that. And then in the epilogue, you can just like walk behind stuff
Okay.
all of a sudden, right?
Okay.
And I don't know that that's something that players will consciously get.
我都没
but
反应过来。
it's different from what's happening, right?
Okay.
There is stuff to play in the epilogue involving the story, right, and game mechanical items, which heretofore have never been in the same place at the same time, right? So that's like a pattern disruption or a convolution of what had been established already. The thing that you do for those or what you get for interacting with them is a different class of thing, right? And again, I don't want to go too much into it, but it's different. So I'm breaking the pattern established by the game up to that point, but I'm not in danger of disrupting the game because this is a tiny part at the end, right?
OK，这样这部分搞定。啊，这边叫什么来着？这边叫 level names，这应该一路往下，一路往上都一样的是吧？我不知道应该怎么走，应该怎么走？看一下应该怎么走。Elevator action 啊，这个可能最后一个了，那应该从上面开始。Three easy pieces， 啊，这个是 level names。
The name Three Easy Pieces is simply factual. These are the first 3 puzzle pieces in the game, and they are intentionally not too hard to get. Their role is just to help communicate the game's basic mechanics. But the name is also a reference to a collection of Richard Feynman's lectures on
Richard
physics,
Feynman。
which is called 6 Easy Pieces. There's a follow-up book of Feynman lectures called 6 Not So Easy Pieces, and I had in the back of my mind that I might at some point title another level correspondingly, but the right situation never presented itself.
这样不行。哦，这个就是那个 leap of faith 哦 ，leap of faith， 这个应该已经看过了。然后 shit， 然后这个 alternative design， 我记得一旦进去很麻烦的是吧？啊不，这个看过了，这个看过了，这个很麻烦的。jump height， 这个应该是另外的东西了。jump height 这什么东西啊？好绕，等一下。啊，这个下一个门是吧？不，这个才是 jump height。哦，想起来那个什么跟马里奥对比的什么，这个东西也看过了。然后这是下一关是吧 ？Alternative design 这个也看过了，确认一下。
If you were hanging around, now going fine of the stage, I struggled with tweaking the parameters to make this level nicer to play, but parameters that work here seemed bad for the rest of the game. We discussed some reasons for this over here, and some more over here.
The Pit.
The Pit is an arcade game from 1982 that was some kind of amalgamation of other games. The goal was to go from your stranded UFO, hollowing out tunnels, avoiding falling boulders, and evading enemies. You go down through a dangerous pit, avoiding arrow traps, which were probably inspired by the film Raiders of the Lost Ark, to grab an energy crystal that could power your ship. Then you go back up across a quickly retracting floor above a giant monster in a pit of acid, and then return to your UFO. All of this happens on one screen.
One screen.
The game certainly had a lot of ideas going on at once. It was fairly random in its inspiration and design, as were so many games in the early
大
80s.
杂烩了。
It's a pretty simple game by modern standards, but it's a game I remember fondly, even though honestly I don't consider it to be one of the better games of the era. When programming home computers, like the TRS-80 color computer or the Commodore 64, I made several variants of the arrow trap room from the Pit, because it's a relatively easy thing to imagine on a text display that has directional arrows in its character set. This made the pit more of a formative experience for me as a programmer. This level has none of the actual mechanics from the arcade game, but I felt the name was a nice tribute.
The name was a nice tribute, and that's it. Three and back again. 这个应该没看过。对 ，Three and back，这每一关都是名字了。The pit, three and back again. The ground beneath her feet，有这么一关吗 ？Irreversible. Jumpman. Elevator action. Jumpman 应该看过了。啊，对，那个东西我查过了，确实在那个大金刚 Donkey Kong 是马里奥第一次现身。那会儿确实马里奥不叫马里奥。最早的话，那个人形就现在看到这个不是绿帽侠，红帽侠，红帽子意大利矮胖水管工，最早是什么名字都没有，就叫 Hero， 就是主人公嘛。后面是叫 Jumpman， 再后面才叫马里奥。当然这个听起来很复杂，其实也就过了1-2年。There and back again.
There and Back Again is a reference to J.R.R. Tolkien's book, The Hobbit.
The Hobbit.
That book is not particularly relevant to what's in this game, but the reference felt cute at the time. Sometimes when a reference feels good, this is the subconscious noticing appropriate but subtle connections that strengthen the game as a whole, and this is a big part of the way that I design, so I try to respect that process and pay attention to it. But maybe, especially in an early game when you're not that mature of a designer, it could be random enthusiasm that defocuses the game by going off on a tangent. And also, you lost the opportunity to name the level something else that might contribute to a greater combined whole. To this day, I'm not sure which kind of reference this is.
最多是5只是吧 ？The ground 就这个是吧？这一关就叫 The ground beneath her feet，还有这样的名字。看一下有没有。这个地方其实挺烦的，我记得需要先这样是吧？先这样，然后老老实走回来是吧？对的，是这样。然后再切回去，对就可以了。拿到之后再，拿到之后不能这么玩，需要的嘛，再回来。对，需要拿到之后马上再回来，再把这个东西启动之后再跳过去，这应该没问题了。
The Ground Beneath Her Feet is a novel by Salman Rushdie that I quite enjoyed when I read it back in 1999. This could be interesting reading if you liked Braid.
If you like Braid, this could be interesting reading. Irreversible 这个name
Irreversible would be a dramatic artist, but
Jumpman 这应该也看过了。
Jumpman was a very popular platformer game in 1980. Back then, he was just called Jumpman.
Elevator action, Scuttle mini games 应该是在后面的区域，先不要去看了，这都是我记得。
Elevator actions arcade games. Eventually, I came up with the idea for this level, which fit the bill, but it's not at all a coincidence. I had been thinking hard for ideas that used elevators, just so that I could name a level Elevator Action.
Elevator action 没了是吧？The original naming scheme. Tim's name.
The character's name Tim is what it is because of the word time.
我没有任何的
Braid didn't come up with this.
想法之前。
In fact, the name is a reference to an obscure home computer game from the 1980s called Dino Eggs.
Dino Eggs.
In that game, the protagonist's name is Time Master Tim.
原来是 Time
Though
Master
such a
Tim.
name is far more apropos in Braid than in Dino Eggs, I didn't feel that the Time Master part fit the mood of the game that I was going for, so I just named him Tim. The name Tim also helps make a connection regarding the killer bunnies. The enchanter in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, who warns the heroes about the killer bunny, is named Tim.
Tim. The original naming scheme.
Originally, the levels didn't even have individual names.
这样的。
They were named by world index and subindex,
Oh.
for example, World 2-1. This was part of the game's overt Super Mario Bros. Influence. I wanted players to see the text World 2-1 and notice that it is just like what Super Mario Bros. Did. But after a while, I got less excited about copying so many superficial details and decided that naming the levels would be better for the player and would help reinforce the atmosphere of the game. In doing so, I lost a bit of referentiality, but I felt there was enough explicit reference to Super Mario Bros. In the monsters and the endgame castles to do the intended communication. Even though the game no longer says World 2-1, all the levels are numbered internally. When I go work on a level, I load up World 5-3 or whatever. All that's invisible to the player, but there are some remnants that are visible to the player. In the house, the puzzle boards still say World 2, World 3, etc.
That's right.
The story screens have numbers in the titles, but don't anymore use the word world.
Okay. Level names and spoilers.
Quite a few puzzle games have cute names for their levels.
Archway.
And very often these names spoil the core surprise of the level, or at least leak information about how you should be thinking. I avoided this to the greatest degree possible.
看看到什么东西？
Quite a few puzzle games.
看一下啊。
Quite a few
Archway 啊，是要连在一起是吧？
quite a few puzzle games
啊，对
have cute names for
，Archway
their
公
levels.
主。
And very often these names spoil the core surprise of the
然后
level,
你就知道怎么
or
玩
at
了是
least
吧？
leak
啊
information about how you should be thinking.
啊，
I avoided this to the greatest degree possible.
去拿别的游戏来举了个反例了，能把这边看完吗？不知道它每一段有多长啊。これ間に合わないな。間に合わないね。嗯。哎，我的幻影呢？没有幻影的吗？没有幻影也没有戒指，那怎么玩啊？嘿，嘿，motherfucker！ 哇 ，That's bullshit！ 好，哦，就进来了是吧？闪着过去，把这个打了。Fortress， 幻影怪是吧？嗯。为什么时间这么长啊？好。耶，这个设计的好烦呐、操！这关设计的好烦呐、This is such a bad level, mate. 没事没事，这没事。Shoot my boots. Uh-oh. Wow. 嗨。Fortress 打工仔嘛，Fortress マジで打工仔。そういうの打工仔ね。あ、これもジャンプしかないのか。めんどくさいな、お前。这种关属于早期有的关是吧？现在全部给你删掉了，是这意思吗？最顶点起跳了是吧？我操！上来了，哥哥，没了吗？ 哎，这个もしかしてうまいなら一発でいけるのか？気づいた？这还真有可能，これ一発でいけるんだな。时间如果能控制好的话，就隔几秒按一下，隔几秒按一下的话，是能一口气就能搞定。反正他把这个时间特别长啊，是故意这么设计的吗？Ridiculous。哎，我刚刚听到一声好，难道睡你没有了吗？它不会有时间限制吗？哎，这么恶心啊，这玩意！这来不及的吧，时间。我操，没了，还真来不及。Fuck you！ 哎，过头了啊！操，这么难的吗？哎，这个设计就有苦难，现在你还需要提前预判的。当你看到的瞬间，你已经来不及了。这还是太晚了。其实我已经预判了，我不是看到我才已经行了，预判哎。Shit！ 哇哦！就不行了呀，他只有一次机会了。What? Isn't this the worst level? 所以我不喜欢完了。所以我不喜欢 mod 就是这道理。 民间的关卡很多就是这种东西。純粋に難しくてあまり意味ないという。あー、マジかー。这不能用的，一旦用了就失败了。是方法的问题吗？好变态的关。好。啊，这有办法了吗？ああ、そうか、分かった。啊，もう時間切れなのかもしれん。啊，我还以为我的计谋成功了呢。为什么第二次不行？为什么只能打开第一次？时间不够了。你这设计太鬼畜了，操！可以的，可以的，可以的，可以的，可以的，可以的。Damn！操，这还是很难。 这个只有4到5，你确定？你确定这个只有4到5？我怎么觉得这么鬼畜呢？这个从花的时间来说，绝对有6的程度。哦，这么个设计，把底下这几个看掉，不知道多长了。Exceptions to the stated rule that this game is about puzzles, not action. Exceptions, puzzle tolerances are tingling. 啊，这个东西看过了，是不是？
The initial motivation for this puzzle began with the vision of the initial
对，看过
motivation.
了，有一点时间了已经。
Maybe your thing doesn't have as much. Like when trying to explain to somebody, like why there are exceptions. It's not. This is not a game of ironclad consistency.
Ironclad.
And I think that's just part of what makes it interesting.
Right. The time mapped to space behavior Ford 4 put constraints to puzzle design. Movement by degrees. 你这没看过吗？啊，这个是连在一起的。Movement by degrees. 哦，这个是看过，这个居然没看过。
Most puzzles in this game are designed so that everything you need to think about at once fits on one screen. However, I did enjoy putting in a few exceptions when it seemed interesting. In this case, an exception was naturally suggested by the mechanics of the game. I wanted you to walk this monster to the left, ensuring he gets through this gauntlet of 3 claws. If it were only 1 or 2 claws, the chances of an accidental puzzle solve would be much higher than it is. The rabbit, the gaps, and the ladder are all set up so that the player has some interesting interactions while trying to position the monster. For example, the ladder is positioned exactly so that the monster will get killed by a claw if you climb the ladder vertically, which stops time for the monster. But because you move to the right to advance time, and the monster is walking the opposite way, it is natural that the monster gets further away from you and eventually goes out of your sight, as is the key that you were trying to grab in the first place. So, you have to solve the final part of the puzzle, just moving the monster to the left end of the level, sight unseen, which feels interesting and different from the rest of the game. You get the usual sound cue when the key has been taken, which is a sign that you've gone far enough. Or if you have no sound, you can just walk all the way to the right end of the level to make sure, because that area has been left open and clear for the right side puzzle piece, which we'll talk about next.
Which we'll talk about next.
This puzzle is a very clear example of partial solvability,
看过了吧
which is nice because it gives players the hint plant, which is not in rewind on it. To
？Partial
above the block.
solvability.
So you can go there first, then jump down, then rewind back up to it. By the time the player gets to this point, he knows he's hot on the trail to fully solving the puzzle, so he's probably in a good mood. This extra step provides a little extra surprise at the end that the player was unlikely to foresee, and that adds a little bit more enjoyment, at least, hopefully.
At least, hopefully. Time mapped to space. Constraints on puzzle design. Can be much nicer when you make partial progress. A balance between walking time and wall speed. A balance between walking time and platform travel speed. 这可能是哪关来着 ？Gap 啊，居然 tingling。哦，在这个地方是吧？这两个我也没看过吗？怎么感觉我看过？
This level involves a few different time-based constraints that all influence each other. So it's a good example of the kind of thought that goes into balancing distances and timings.
先往
The
上走。
fundamental idea of the rightmost puzzle piece is that the player can't possibly reach it before the wall closes. So he has to do something crazy to get it.
Right.
But the player doesn't yet know that that's the idea. When he first enters the level, he's just playing the game, trying to get the puzzle pieces straightforwardly. We want him to be able to run over to the area near the locked gate and see the falling wall, still mostly open but falling quickly. We want the player to feel like he might have a chance to race fast enough to unlock the gate and get the puzzle piece. It takes 5 or 6 seconds to get over there from the start of the level, so we want this wall to take a lot more than 6 seconds to close. But whereas we want him to think he might be able to get through the gate in time and to try a little bit, we actually want this to be impossible. To make it impossible, we make the player travel a long distance to get the key up and around and back. We taunt the player by putting the key near the entrance, and the monster picking up the key makes a sound cue that may alert the player to the presence of the key, which mitigates the camouflage due to the key somewhat blending into the background colors. We could have made the key a different color, but maybe the player would think it behaves differently from other keys he's seen. When designing this originally, I didn't want that confusion. In this game, the keys always look the same because they always behave the same. They just have different time effects applied. Was this refusal to recolor the key good design, or was it just me being over-concerned about something small? Often it's hard to tell the difference. Anyway, if the player can grab the key and open the gate before the wall is closed, that wrecks our puzzle, so we have to prevent him from doing that. We could make the wall close faster, or we could make the path he must travel longer. Here, I made the path to the key a bit convoluted, but I also added the constraint that he must pull the lever to move the platform, and doing both of these things takes quite a while. If the player ignores the lever and just goes immediately to the key and then the gate, we time the wall so that it shuts right about the time he gets there, which is good dramatic timing and also indicates that he probably can't get there in time. But he'll also figure out he needs the platform to stand on, and by the time he also pulls the lever, it will be overwhelmingly obvious this is all just too slow. But this is fine because he made progress. He can at least open the gate and go explore the right half of the level, even though the wall is shut and he can't get the puzzle piece now. There are some tricks you can do on this level. Because the lever is sparkling green, you can go down, wait to stomp on the monster, pull the lever, and then rewind quickly back up to the top of the first ladder, then continue over to get the key. The timing of the wall is such that even if you do all this very efficiently, it will slam into the floor right when you finally get to it, indicating that you're at least several seconds too late. But because you can do this rewind trick, the little maze leading to the switch has to be longer than it would otherwise be to ensure that the travel time in only the direction toward the switch is sufficiently long so that expert players cannot break the puzzle. We want the player to struggle a little bit and to try to get through the gate in a straightforward way, because when he sees clearly that the straightforward solution doesn't work, it makes the actual solution, which is wacky, seem more necessary and a lot cooler. It was something that was impossible, this wall comes down far too fast, and the strange time effect helps him do the impossible. On the right-hand side of the level, we have a sparkling platform that permits the player to rewind to the start of the level but change his starting position. The idea is that he's now close enough to the key that it's possible to get it, but it shouldn't be easy, so he must run a gauntlet of obstacles. When building this level, I wanted to create the experience of rewinding at a very fast speed, with all these cannonballs and monsters flying by extremely quickly. I wanted the travel back to the puzzle piece to be a bit hectic, dodging a bunch of stuff, but without adding too many cannons to the level. This is why the cannonballs fly upward through the spikes, so that you have to dodge them twice. But there's a fortuitous timing. The cannonballs collide and destroy each other every 14th shot of the rightmost cannon. And the phase is set up so that this is the 6th shot after you rewind back to the beginning of the level. Which means, if you are running back to the puzzle piece and doing it somewhat efficiently, such that you hit the right timing, this 6th shot will happen right when you are climbing across the spike pit, helping you out a little bit. It takes about 13 seconds to get from the sparkling platform to the puzzle piece, so the wall has to close more slowly than 13 seconds. But if it closes a lot more slowly, maybe you didn't have to frantically dodge the gauntlet. And if it were to close tremendously more slowly, again, this would allow the player to skip the whole right half of the puzzle because he could just get to it from the beginning of the level. So I tuned it so that it's about 16 seconds before you can no longer get into where the puzzle piece is. You have something like 3 seconds of slack between when you could get in and when you must get in. That's not a long time, all things considered, but I wanted to tune this to be an action-y puzzle that you need to perform somewhat efficiently.
这时间控制还算可以，当你知道怎么做了，基本一遍就能成了，还算是宽。
Now, at the same time that all these constraints are active for this puzzle piece, we also have the first puzzle piece on the left. To get that piece, you need to stand on this ledge over here so you can jump onto the platform and then climb the ladder. But the platform travels quickly enough that you can't just walk there after throwing the switch, again because the path is long and convoluted. You have to rewind there at faster than walking speed. This is a unifying theme of both puzzles in this level. You are rewinding at a speed faster than
但这样的话，你拿不
one.
了
In
钥匙。
general, when there are two puzzles on the same level, they have some thematic connection like this, though I don't always expect the player to see the connection consciously. You can solve this puzzle with the platform moving either right or left. It's easier if you first move the platform to the right, then go to the target ledge and get on the platform as it travels to the left, since this gives you a lot more time to get there. So here's another time constraint. We need this platform to move faster than you can walk, enough so for this puzzle to make sense. But the speed of the platform also influences the times and distances for the locked gate that we already discussed. Fortunately, because we mostly use walking distances to control the gate unlock time, the platform travel speed isn't a super big issue there. We made it so that you can't ride the platform back since you'll get scraped off by this wall over here. But the walking distance along the top of the level is a determining factor. It's likely that many players will solve this puzzle by walking from the goal ledge up and around the top of the level back to the switch, even though the best solution is to drop down and run along the bottom of the level, which is a shorter path. But this has a psychological barrier since dropping off that ledge feels like a one-way movement, so you have to be comfortable with rewind to do it. We want to allow players to solve the level from the goal ledge, scraped off by this wall over here. But the walking distance along the top of the level is a determining factor. It's likely that many players will solve this puzzle by walking from the goal ledge up and around the top of the level back to the switch, even though the best solution is to drop down and run along the bottom of the level, which is a shorter path. But this has a psychological barrier since dropping off that ledge feels like a one-way movement, so you have to be comfortable with rewind to do it.
哎，真的吗？等一下，
Players will solve this puzzle by walking from the goal ledge up and around the top of the level back to the switch, even though the best solution is to drop down and run along the bottom of the level, which is a shorter path.
哦，这样的。
Walking from the goal ledge up and around the top of the level back to the switch, even though the best solution is to drop down and run along the bottom of the level, which is a shorter path. But this has a psychological barrier since dropping off that ledge feels like a one-way movement.
哦，好像确实是更快。
With rewind
哦。
to do it. We want to allow players to solve the level by going along the top, so we don't want to make that too hard by making the timing too intolerant. Why? Because the focus of the puzzle is rewinding to the ledge. If we add other elements of difficulty, it will defocus the puzzle, because the player will be struggling with issues that are not directly related to rewinding to the ledge. That said, I do enjoy that the bottom path is shorter and provides a cleaner solution, as this adds a dimension to the game where players can use improved understanding and skill. But I want both paths to work and not be Earlier we said that to increase clarity for the falling wall, we wanted to make the travel path to the key long and convoluted. That's also good for this leftmost puzzle up to a point because it is needed for the puzzle to work. But at some point it starts making the puzzle harder because even though you rewind quickly to get to the goal, rewinding still takes time. And if you rewind too fast, you might overshoot unless you prepared carefully by standing still on the ledge for a while. Since this path along the top matters for both puzzles, we need to find a balance in terms of length that works for both. If this sounds like a bunch of complicated, intertwining thoughts, it is. All this is just what it's like to design puzzles that are interlocking, and what we've covered here today is really only at a basic level. To explain everything I thought about when designing this puzzle would take a lot longer.
Yeah, take a lot longer. 这边底下算结束了啊，这关最快是这么玩的是吧？试一下啊。我觉得我应该懂了吧？你这边往上走，是往上走，没问题。然后这个地方把它踩掉之后，要把钥匙带走。啊，最好小跳一下。啊，对，是往这儿走更快。这样可能啊，对，确实能更快一点。操 ，fuck。哦哦啊！overshoot，overshoot，overshoot。啊，确实这样更快。fuck you。这样的话能直接把这块干掉，就不用等了。Shit my boots。那这是不用跳了，直接走就好了。对，这样刚好一个来回，还真的快一些。妈，这次这方慢了。这样就上来可以，这样更快。就先这样子，这里是能出来的。顶上还有这边2层，给力个立马你要搞，顶上能来得及吗？啊，是能来得及，这还是给你设计过的，就让你觉得时间很紧张，其实是来得及。 下一期的部分不知道能不能搞定这两个东西。Level names and spoiler level 的这么的。What is even this? Level names and spoilers. 这个是 level names and spoilers， 但为什么这里有一个啊？可能是这个东西的传送门是吗？这个肯定看过来，怎么会在这儿出来一个东西？不觉得很奇怪吗？这关也不大吧。
Most of the most way.
Right.
You called it hand.
啊，看过来。
It's like it comes after. But the thing to realize is how that level is received. The part that people remember, their experience there depends on the initial conditions,
Right.
right? Even if they forget the initial conditions.
Right, yeah.
And so initial conditions are important.
先要把底下的部分给它弄掉，然后还再来看这儿。这个地方我其实直接走了过不去了，也刚刚挡一下就能过去，不挡还真对，不挡就过不去，不挡一发过来确实过不去。啊，这边其实也看的差不多了。底下这里为什么会有4个门呢？这4个门你不觉得很奇怪吗？啊，这个是 the pit， 跑这儿来了。哦，所以叫 the pit 哦，有这么多 pit， 所以一个一个 pit。这4关是连在一起的 ，the pit 啊，这里又放了一个，原来如此，嗨，那下一期争取把这个 special topic 搞定。这个就不知道了，这 Cassie 穆拉托里感觉很长啊，やばいなそれ。这块是什么？好。这个难道不是啊？对，对它这个全部是这种形状的话，根本就说不好哪一片在哪儿。行吧，就先这样。嚯，这个 design 已经打了几期了？啊，这期已经 design 第5期了，是吧 ？design 感觉就能打10期啊。那这个应该就是毫无疑问最长的一段了。别的一些应该会短一些。每一段像这样的得了。